My parents canceled my 18th birthday because of my sister's tantrum, and I swear that was the day everything I had silently tolerated my whole life finally snapped inside me. You'd think turning 18 would be a big moment, something special, something your family would at least try to make memorable. But in my house, birthdays were never about the person they belonged to, they were always about my sister. Growing up, every plan, every event, every celebration somehow twisted itself around her mood. Her demands, her tears, her drama, and if she wasn't satisfied, the entire house walked on eggshells until she got what she wanted. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up actually hopeful for the first time in years, thinking maybe things would be different now that I was officially an adult. I had this small checklist in my head: breakfast together, maybe a card, maybe a smile from my dad, maybe something that showed they remembered who I was, beyond being that understanding one. Instead, the day began with my sister screaming because the dress she wanted to wear wasn't ironed. I heard my name being dragged into it because in that house, everything was somehow my responsibility. My mom yelled from the kitchen that I should have ironed it last night, even though nobody told me. And even if they had, I wasn't her personal assistant. I walked out to the living room, where my sister was dramatically crying on the sofa like she had lost everything in her life. My parents were around her like she was royalty, and when I gently reminded them that today was supposed to be my birthday dinner, they both acted like I had committed a crime. My mom didn't even look up when she said, "We're canceling it. She's too stressed today." Too stressed? Over a dress? My dad chimed in saying, I should be more understanding because she was going through a sensitive phase. Sensitive phase? She had been in a sensitive phase for 16 years straight. My entire childhood had been sacrificed on the altar of her emotions. I stood there quietly, realizing that nothing I did, nothing I achieved, nothing I felt would ever matter as long as she was in the room. After that, the day got worse. They ordered her favorite breakfast, played her favorite music, sat with her watching movies, pampered her like it was her special day, not mine. I kept telling myself not to cry because crying felt like proving them right that I was the emotional one. I isolated myself in my room, listening to them laugh and talk outside, like nothing meaningful had been taken from me. When I heard my mom throw away the birthday cake she had supposedly bought just in case, it felt like someone pressed delete on my entire childhood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run outside and ask if anyone could see what was happening, if anyone noticed the way they dismissed my existence. But no sound came out, because deep down, I already knew the answer. They didn't care. They never had. That evening, while they were preparing snacks for her, because she was still upset, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sat on the floor of my room and packed a small bag. A few clothes, my documents, my savings from part-time jobs, my charger, a cracked old laptop I used for school, and the last bit of pride I had left. I didn't slam doors, didn't cry loudly, didn't create any drama. I left quietly, because making noise had never changed anything in that house anyway. Around 4 in the morning, the whole place was silent. I walked through the living room one last time. My sister's shoes were scattered on the floor, my dad's mug still on the table, my mom's half-folded laundry on the sofa. The same life I had lived for years, just frozen, peaceful, only because I had played my role as the invisible caretaker. I placed my house key on the dining table and stared at it for a long minute. That small metal key had locked me inside a life where I was always second, always forgotten. Leaving it behind felt like setting myself free. I quietly opened the door and walked out into the cold dawn air, and for the first time in 18 years, the world felt bigger than the walls of my house. I walked to my friend's place, the only person who ever listened without judgment. When they opened the door and saw me standing there with a bag, they didn't ask 100 questions. They just said, "Come inside." That night, I slept peacefully, not because things were perfect, but because things were finally mine. By afternoon, my phone had 20 missed calls from my mom, 10 from my dad, and 5 from my sister. The messages weren't, "Are you okay?" or "We're worried about you." No, they said things like, "This is irresponsible," "We need you home," "Your sister needs help," and my personal favorite, "Stop creating drama." Me? Creating drama? The irony made me laugh in a way I never had before. The girl who never got a birthday, who never got attention, who never caused chaos was now being called dramatic for running away from the chaos they created. I ignored every call. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally learned that peace sometimes means stepping away from the people you love. 2 days later, I got a voice note from my mother saying she was disappointed in my behavior, but still not one word about my birthday. Not a single acknowledgement. A week passed before my sister finally called me, crying. She said nothing was working at home. The house was a mess. Nobody was cooking. My parents were arguing constantly. No one knew where anything was kept because I used to organize everything. She said she didn't realize how much she relied on me until I wasn't there. And as she cried, I realized something important: my absence was louder than my presence had ever been. She said, "Please come home, please, I can't do this." But for the first time in my life, I didn't rush in to save her. I simply said, "I need time." After a few days, both my parents called together. Their voices were softer, shaken. They told me they missed me, that they wanted me to come back, that things weren't the same without me. They promised they would try to change, try to treat me better, try to be fair. But promises are easy. Change isn't. I took a deep breath and said the words I had been scared to voice my whole life: "I love you. But I need to choose myself right now." And just like that, the weight of 18 years lifted off my shoulders. They went quiet, and in that silence, I finally heard something I had never heard before: respect. The days after I refused to return home felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet for someone who had spent their entire life surrounded by noise, tension, and constant emotional emergencies that never belonged to me, but were somehow always my responsibility. At my friend's place, mornings started slowly, peacefully, with sunlight coming through the curtains instead of my sister's shouting. For the first time, I wasn't waking up to someone blaming me for something trivial. I wasn't being asked to fetch things, fix things, apologize for things I never did. I wasn't being told to understand someone else's emotions while mine were ignored. Instead, I woke up, stretched, breathed, and felt like a real human being, not a background character in a household drama. My friend's mom cooked breakfast, and every time she asked if I wanted more, I felt this weird twist inside me because I wasn't used to adults caring about whether I had enough to eat. I kept saying I'm fine, even when I wasn't, because being comfortable was something I still didn't know how to accept. On the third morning, my phone buzzed again: 47 messages from my mom, 31 from my sister, and 9 from my dad, who never texted unless something serious had happened. But the messages weren't about love or concern. They were about chores piling up, bills forgotten, arguments getting louder, my sister having a breakdown because no one could understand her like I did. They said the house felt empty, disorganized, chaotic without me. And maybe that should have felt satisfying, but honestly, it just felt sad. Sad that the only time they realized my worth was when I left. Meanwhile, my friend encouraged me to apply for part-time work nearby, something small that would give me a little independence. I hesitated because leaving home had already been such a big step, but eventually I walked into a cafe down the street and asked if they were hiring. The owner, a warm, middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at me for half a second and said, "You can start tomorrow." I wanted to cry from relief, from fear, from everything I'd held inside for years, but I just smiled and said thank you. That night, as I lay on the mattress they had set up for me, I thought about how strange it was that strangers could offer me more respect and stability in 3 days than my own family had in 18 years. On the 7th day, my dad finally sent a long message, something he never did. He said he wasn't good with words, that he didn't know how to handle emotions, that he had always relied on me because I was the calm one. He said he didn't realize how much pressure he had put on me until the house fell apart without me there to hold everything together. Reading his message didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open in me, something I had spent years locking away. Later that night, my sister sent another message, longer than any she had ever sent me. She said she knew I hated her. She said she knew she ruined things. She said she didn't know why she was always angry, but she couldn't stop. She said she was scared that I had left forever. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't hate her. I hated the way our parents raised us, one as a princess who could do no wrong and the other as a quiet worker who had no right to feel anything. Their parenting had shaped her into someone who believed the world revolved around her mood, and it had shaped me into someone who believed my feelings were burdens. So I took a deep breath and replied, "I don't hate you. I just needed space to breathe." After that, she sent voice notes, soft ones, Shaky ones talking about how she didn't know how to cook, how she didn't know how to organize things, how she didn't know why she always panicked when things didn't go her way. She sounded like a child, not the monster I had built in my head. It hurt to hear, but it also helped me understand her in a way I never had. A week later, my mom called again. This time her voice was softer, tired, cracked. She said she missed me. She said she wasn't sleeping. She said she didn't realize how much they depended on me, not just for chores but for calmness, for stability. She said she felt like she failed me. Hearing that made my chest tighten, because for years, I had waited for her to say something like that. I didn't give her an answer right away. I told her I needed time, that I wasn't ready, that healing wasn't something I could rush just because things were inconvenient for them now. She cried and said, "Take your time. Just don't disappear." After the call, I sat outside, looking at the street lights and thinking about how strange life was, that sometimes you had to break everything just to show how much you were holding together. My job at the cafe started the next morning, and it became the first place where I felt genuinely appreciated. The customers were kind, the routine was simple, the environment calm. Every time I completed a task, the owner thanked me, a word I rarely heard at home. And the more I experienced normal kindness, the more I realized how unhealthy my home environment had been. 2 weeks passed. 3. Slowly, I learned how to smile without feeling guilty, how to rest without feeling lazy, how to speak without being interrupted or dismissed. I still talked to my parents, but with boundaries. I still listened to my sister, but without letting her consume my emotional energy. Then, one evening, my dad called and said something I never imagined I would hear him say: "We want family therapy." I froze. My dad, the man who never believed in talking about feelings, was willing to sit in front of a stranger and discuss his parenting. That shock alone told me things were truly shifting. He said they wanted to fix things, not because they feared losing me, but because they finally understood how much damage had been done over the years. And for the first time, I believed him. The next morning, I walked to the cafe feeling lighter than usual. My life wasn't perfect. My home wasn't healed. My relationship with my sister was still complicated. But for the first time ever, things were moving in the right direction, slowly, awkwardly, but honestly. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning of me learning who I was outside the shadows of my family. The 3rd week away from home felt strangely familiar, yet completely new. Like I was slowly rebuilding myself from scraps of a life I never got to fully live. And every day I discovered things about myself that I didn't know existed because I had been too busy taking care of everyone else. I learned that I liked quiet mornings, that I enjoyed drinking tea alone, that I could walk down the street without fearing being called back to do a chore, and that the world didn't collapse when I wasn't constantly fixing things. One evening at the cafe, while wiping tables after closing time, the owner casually said, "You seem lighter lately, like you're breathing again." I didn't realize how true that was until she said it. For so many years, I had been holding my breath, waiting for the next crisis, the next meltdown, the next explosion at home, constantly preparing myself to be the stable one, the quiet one, the responsible one. Now, without those expectations pressing on my shoulders, my body felt new, like I had been living with weights tied to my ribs, and suddenly someone had cut them off. That night, while walking back to my friend's house under the streetlights, I checked my phone and saw a message from my dad: "Therapist appointment scheduled. We'll go even if you don't return yet." I stopped walking. My dad never followed through on emotional promises. He avoided conflict, he avoided vulnerability, he avoided responsibility. So seeing him commit to something uncomfortable without me being there meant something deeper was happening. I didn't reply. I just stared at the message until the screen dimmed. When I got home, my friend noticed the expression on my face and jokingly said, "You look like someone confessed their love to you." I laughed, but inside I felt something heavy and warm shifting. The next day, while I was on my break at work, my sister sent a voice note. I hesitated before opening it, because her voice had always been tied to chaos in my mind, but when I pressed play, her tone was tired, soft, and trembling. She said she had gone to the first therapy session with our parents even though she didn't want to at first. She said the therapist asked her why she felt the need to control every situation, and she didn't have an answer. She said she cried in front of them, not out of anger like usual, but out of confusion, because she didn't understand why she reacted the way she did. She said the therapist explained something that stunned me. Children often become demanding or dramatic when they're raised to believe their emotions are the only ones that matter. And over time, they become terrified of anything going wrong because they never learned how to handle discomfort. Hearing that made me go still. My sister wasn't a villain, she was a product of uneven parenting. And so was I. She said she told the therapist she didn't want to be this way anymore, that she didn't want to hurt people, especially me. She said she wished she had understood me sooner. I sat there in the back room of the cafe with my lunch untouched, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and untied a knot that had been there since childhood. When I got off work, I finally replied, "I'm proud of you for going." The next day, my mom sent a message saying the therapist told them something that made her cry. He said that in most families, the quiet, responsible child becomes invisible because they cause no problems, and the parents unconsciously place more attention on the louder child. He said parents often don't realize they are neglecting the child who holds everything together. And he told my parents, gently but firmly, that they had failed me by depending on me instead of parenting me. My mom said hearing that felt like someone slapped her awake. She wrote, "I am sorry, truly sorry, for everything." I stared at her message for a long time, not because I didn't believe her, but because I had waited so long to hear those words that now I didn't know what to do with them. Over the next week, my parents kept going to therapy. My sister kept sending updates. And slowly, something strange started happening. Their house, the same house that used to suffocate me, began changing without me even being there. My sister learned how to do basic chores slowly, clumsily, but she was trying. My dad started helping around the house instead of expecting me to handle everything. My mom started questioning her own patterns instead of defending them. One night, my dad sent me a photo of the dining table with the caption, "We set a place for you every day. No pressure, just hope." I didn't cry, but something warm pressed against the back of my throat. The next evening at the cafe, the owner asked if I wanted to take on more hours, maybe even learn how to run the register or help with inventory. She said she saw potential in me, said I was hardworking, reliable, calm under pressure. I realized nobody had ever described me that way before, and those words mattered a lot. That night, while walking home, I thought about how far I had come in such a short time. From the invisible child to someone building a life of their own. From the quiet caretaker to someone finally receiving care. From someone who lived through others' emotions to someone discovering their own. When I reached my friend's house, my phone buzzed again. It was my mom. "We're having another session tomorrow. The therapist asked if you'd like to join whenever you're ready. No expectations. Just whenever you feel safe." I read that message over and over because for the first time, my family wasn't demanding something from me, they were inviting me, gently, respectfully. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. I wasn't ready to go home permanently. I wasn't ready to step back into that house. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to take the first step toward healing the wounds that had shaped my entire life. For the first time since I left, I replied, "I'll think about it." And sometimes, "I'll think about it" is the bravest sentence a hurt child can say. The moment I stepped into my new life, everything felt both terrifying and strangely peaceful. For the first time, there was no yelling in the background, no footsteps waiting to interrupt my silence. No, sisters screaming over something meaningless. And no parents treating me like the backup parent they never appreciated. I woke up in my small apartment the next morning and realized that even though the walls were empty and the room felt cold, it still felt more like home than the house I had lived in for 18 years. Days passed, and while I adjusted to my new routine, my parents continued calling and texting. At first, the messages were emotional. Filled with guilt-tripping lines like, "We didn't know you were this sensitive," or "Your sister is struggling without you." But when I didn't respond, their tone slowly changed. The guilt turned into anger, then anger turned into panic, and finally, panic turned into silence. Meanwhile, I focused on myself, my job, my studies, my future. I started cooking my own meals, planning my own life, and finally feeling the freedom I had been denied for years. One evening, almost 2 months later, I received a message from my sister. Unlike before, it didn't come with crying emojis or dramatic threats. It was just a single sentence. "Can we talk?" Against my expectations, she showed up at a small cafe near my place. She looked different not in appearance, but in sincerity. For the first time, she didn't rush into a tantrum or complain about life being unfair. She just sat quietly, and after a long pause, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't fake. It trembled slightly, and that alone made me listen. She told me how the house had changed after I left, how the tension between our parents grew worse, how she realized every day how much she relied on me not because she cared, but because she had never been taught to survive without someone doing things for her. She admitted that she ruined my birthday, that she had been selfish her whole life, and that maybe she acted that way because our parents always rewarded her tantrums and ignored my needs. Hearing that didn't erase the past, but it did something else. It showed me growth. And growth was something rare in that house. I told her clearly that I forgave her, but forgiveness didn't mean going back to the same place where I had been hurt for years. It didn't mean becoming the older sibling who solved everyone's problems while no one cared about mine. It simply meant letting go so I could move forward. When she asked if I would ever return home, I smiled and told her the truth. I'm finally building a life for myself. I can visit, but I can't live there again. She nodded, and surprisingly, she understood. Later that week, my parents tried one last time to convince me to move back. They promised change, promised balance, promised they would treat me equally. But I wasn't the same kid they used to control. I was stronger now, clearer now, and I knew exactly what choosing myself felt like. So I told them calmly that I loved them, but I was not returning to a place where I had to shrink just to keep the peace. And that was the final turning point. They realized that the quiet kid, the helper, the forgotten sibling, the one they took for granted for years, had finally outgrown their control. The story didn't end with dramatic revenge or loud arguments. It ended with peace, boundaries, and truth. I moved out quietly, and I grew loudly. And on my 19th birthday, instead of waiting for people to celebrate me, I celebrated myself with friends who cared, with a life I chose, and with a heart no longer carrying the weight of a home that never felt like home. That was the real beginning, and the real ending, the end.